Hello, all.
I, you're just getting them coming in now.
Hello, everyone. We see their attendees are signing in. Looks to be well attended. For those of you who just joined us, we're just waiting for more participants to sign in. Looks like everyone's coming in at once. And we're hitting an asymptote of attendees that are joining. Okay, I think we can start. Hello all, welcome to this webinar, Building a Transition Pathway to a Vibrant Hydrogen Economy in the Alberta Industrial Heartland. My name is Dan Wicklum. I'm the CEO of the Transition Accelerator, and we have two guests with us, David Layzell, who's the Chief Energy System Architect for the Transition Accelerator, and we're extremely pleased to have Mayor Alanna, who is the Mayor of Sturgeon County. I'm just going to set some context here and tell you about the run of show, but what's going to happen today. So we have now about 150 people on the webinar and some joining all the time. So with this volume of people, it's just not practical to have live questioning, but we of course do have two functions inside of our Zoom platform here. The first one is the chat. So we really encourage people to get on that chat forum, ask questions, answer each other's questions, be provocative, push the envelope. That's why we're here. So please use that chat, and I'll actually, throughout the course of the hour we have together here, I'll be active on that chat as well. But of course, there's also a Q&A function. So if you do have a question that you'd like to ask either Dr. Layzell, myself, or Mayor Hnatiw, please ask the question on the Q&A function, because we won't be opening up the microphones, given the fact that now we have 165 participants and climbing. So the run of show is very soon. I'm going to turn this over to Mayor Hnatiw for some opening comments. Then Dave and I will give a tag team presentation. I'll talk a little bit about context, hydrogen, a little bit about the work that we've been doing with the Alberta Industrial Heartland Task Force, a little bit about the report. But Dave will really take over and talk about the guts of the report and so what's next. We're going to try to get that all done in about 40 to 45 minutes. So we've got some good time for Q's and A's. So thanks very much. So a little bit of context here. We launched this task force in the Alberta Heartland in very late May. And essentially what it was recognizing the fact that the world seemed to be waking up, that there's this fantastic hydrogen potential. We did a scan of the country, developed some criteria, and asked ourselves the question, where would be the best place to start in Canada to launch a transition pathway to a hydrogen as fuel economy? And for lots of different reasons that mostly Dave will go into, the Alberta area, Alberta Industrial Heartland and the Edmonton area popped up as one of the most promising places. So we approached the elected officials of the 5 jurisdictions of the Heartland, including Mayor Hnatiw of Sturgeon County. And it was quite remarkable, the reception that we got, that they immediately understood the potential and leaned into the leadership role. And quite frankly, this task force would not have been launched, and we would not have been able to do the work without Mayor Alanna and her elected official colleagues from the Heartland. So Mayor Hnatiw, I'll turn it over to you for some opening remarks. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the, I think, extraordinary work that has been accomplished so far. So good morning and welcome to today's webinar, How to Accelerate a Canadian Hydrogen Economy with Hydrogen Nodes. As mentioned, my name is Alanna, Mayor of Sturgeon County, and one of the 5 municipal leaders on the Alberta Industrial Heartland Hydrogen Task Force. The other municipal leaders at the table are Mayor Don Iveson from the City of Edmonton, Mayor Gail Ketcher from the City of Fort Saskatchewan, and Mayor Rod Frank from Strathcona County, and Reeve David Didyk from Lamont County. We are joined today by a wide range of stakeholders representing industry, technology, innovators, and policymakers from all levels of government. And I look forward to hearing from our presenters and some insightful discussion as well. Today's webinar is particularly timely as just yesterday, we launched the Alberta Industrial Heartland Hydrogen Task Force final report on how to build a hydrogen economy in the industrial heartland. So the hydrogen economy is a way that Alberta and our resource-based economy can win in an increasingly competitive and environmentally conscious world. The fact is that the world is moving to low carbon energy at an increasing pace, and upgrading natural gas to hydrogen and using hydrogen as a fuel is a way that we can still develop our fossil fuels, but in a way that works in a low carbon economy. So I'm excited about the prospects of creating a hydrogen node in the Heartland, as we have all of the key ingredients to be successful. That's including the ability to make low-cost byproducts, blue and green hydrogen, substantial nearby markets for hydrogen, and the ability to connect supply to demand, ideally through pipelines, and appropriate scale of supply and demand where the economics work without sustained public investment, and engaged industry, governments, and academics. And when you add all of these elements up, it gives us a real competitive advantage. And it is my hope, and those of my fellow task force members, that our report will lead to a greater collaboration between industry and government for development of a hydrogen node here in the Heartland. The time is right, and a hydrogen economy aligns with the environmental, the economic, and the social needs of all three orders of government, both federal, provincial, and municipal. Hydrogen gives us to be positive about our energy sector and to recognize our incredible history of innovation and to celebrate our expertise at solving environmental challenges. If there has ever been a time to show the world how resilient, adaptive, and innovative and tenacious that Albertans can be, it is now. And that's what the experts are here to talk about today. And with that said, I'll turn it back over to our speakers, the experts who will tell us further why hydrogen is important, why Canada needs to make it happen, and why it should be here in Alberta's industrial heartland to start. So please allow me to introduce the Transition Accelerator leaders, both David Layzell and Dan Wicklum. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Well said. And Dave will share his screen now, and we'll use that as a discussion prompt. Okay, so you might have seen that this report was actually released yesterday morning. If you don't have it, it's on the Transition Accelerator website. And of course, if you follow us on either LinkedIn or Twitter, you'll get any updates or new information in real time. But this is the talk, building a transition pathway. Here's our acknowledgements, the 5 municipal partners, but also we have to acknowledge our funders, which almost all of them, in addition to the municipal partners, are philanthropic foundations. And I have to say most of them from Central Canada as well, but that's essentially where the accelerator gets its core funding. Okay, very quickly in the accelerator, 30 seconds. We're a new organization, we're a nonprofit. We operate right across the country. And we take a different framing to change. And the logic stream goes like this. We want to understand that we are in the middle of disruptions right now, technical, business model, social disruptions. So the future will be different even if we do nothing. But we don't want to do nothing. We actually want to accelerate these disruptions to make sure that they work for us and that we end up in a better place than we are today. So we want to use these disruptions to make sure that we win economically and socially and environmentally. So what we do is we create what we call transition pathways that are the series of steps that we need to take together to achieve a better future. Another thing that we really build into our thinking is that we understand and want to recognize that change is more about economics. Economic models don't make buying decisions. They don't make investment decisions. They're important, but people make those decisions. So we really focus our work also on the people component. Next slide, Dave. I think it's important to know that the publication we're talking about today that was released yesterday is the 6th in a series of Transition Accelerator reports that starts right back asking the questions around what are the best ways to move heavy things around the landscape, and then sequentially adds analysis and adds quantification to lead us up to where we are today in terms of what are the specific steps we need to take in hydrogen. So I think all these are on the Transition Accelerator website, and I'd encourage you to take a look at them. And if you've got any questions or comments, just put something into social media and we'll get back to you. Next slide, Dave. Okay, here's the framing. For years, decades, the world has been trying to reduce emissions. And that's been the game, reduction. And we've taken sort of a wedge approach, asking how can we get X degree of emission reduction from sector A? How can we get Y degree of emission reduction from sector B? And that's sort of an approach that starts with the existing energy system. Take a look at that pie diagram on your left. Details don't matter about it. But basically, we've been trying to reduce emissions. But the game has changed. What now we want to do is trying to get to net zero emissions by 2050. And as you know, over 75 countries now have a net zero emissions objective. Many of them are putting that objective into legislation. It's not an aspirational target. It's a state they want to exist in the future. So here's the sort of punchline. There are many ways to reduce emissions, but there's actually very few ways you can have a functional energy system that delivers the energy system, goods and services that we need to have a functional society and be net zero. So the figure on the right is the idea of defining a net zero energy system. And many of the countries that have this net zero goal, instead of trying to take a wedge approach to decrease wedges of emissions from an existing system, they're trying to define what the future energy system looks like. So that's functional and net zero, and then create a transition pathway to get there. And you know what? Experts are not going to agree on what a future net zero energy system looks like. That's just not going to happen. But what there is emerging is an extremely strong consensus that hydrogen will be a large part of a future energy system. We'll have massive electrification and we'll have massive hydrification. And that's actually why we're seeing this remarkable proliferation of interest in hydrogen globally. It's because there's a strong consensus that you can't have a net zero energy system without it. Next slide then, Dave. A couple of data points here. Why can't you have a net zero energy system without it? Well, there's some things that hydrogen can do that other types of energy can't. And one of them is especially moving heavy things around the landscape. Batteries just get too heavy. And I'll talk about that just in a second. This figure is sort of cool. This is not our data. These are an independent study in 2018, but they've been verified several times since 2018. The details really don't matter here, but what this shows is the cost of producing hydrogen at different places in the world using different technologies. So along the x-axis, you've got the cost of producing hydrogen. Units don't matter, it happens to be in dollars per gigajoule. So the further right you go, the more costly hydrogen is to produce. On the y-axis, and of course all of these green and blue bars, these are where hydrogen is made in different parts of the world. So you see countries. And there's also two major types of hydrogen being produced. Green, of course, is when you take water, and as long as you have a clean electrical grid, you use that electricity to split the water into oxygen and hydrogen, then you get what some people call green hydrogen. Down at the bottom, you have blue. So you can take basically any hydrocarbon. The world predominantly uses natural gas. But if you take natural gas, put it through an upgrading process called reforming, and so long as you capture that natural gas, capture the resultant carbon dioxide and sequester it, then you've got very low emission hydrogen as well, very low carbon footprint hydrogen as well. And people call that blue hydrogen. Two more points in this slide. One is we seem to be locking into this narrative, good hydrogen is green hydrogen, bad hydrogen is blue hydrogen. Our analysis show that nothing could be further from the truth. We've done full life cycle analysis and show that in many cases, the carbon intensity, full life cycle of blue hydrogen is actually less than the full life cycle intensity carbon of green hydrogen. So really we should be thinking about carbon intensities. Last point, then if you take a look at that black band is the wholesale cost of diesel. And when you take a look at where the cost of producing hydrogen in Alberta, which is the lowest Canadian flag, the cost of producing hydrogen in Alberta is about half the cost of producing diesel in Alberta, wholesale costs. So that's got to be a great thing if we think the world is going to move predominantly or markedly into a hydrogen economy. So when you take a look at those two Canadian flags, the bottom one is the cost of producing blue hydrogen in Canada, about the cheapest in the world. And you'll notice also that we have about the lowest cost green hydrogen in the world as well. So think about a world where we are taking Canadian energy, whether it's electricity or fossil fuels, and we're changing it into a fuel that we can burn in engines, burn in heat, for heat that is fully compatible with a net zero world. That's really the hydrogen promise. And next slide, Dave. Look, this is a bit of shock and awe. All this is showing is that there's a remarkable number of countries in the world that have already put out national strategies. And Canada is about to put ours out. We've input into the national strategy that Natural Resources Canada is putting the final touches on, and we think that's going to be a very strong document. But the world is going very quickly in hydrogen. We're a bit late to the game, and we're not moving as quickly as others. but we have the potential to catch up. Next slide. And over to you, Dave.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan. What I'm going to try to do is give a bit of an overview of the document that we came out yesterday, but also I'm going to be touching back to some of the previous report that came out about a month ago or so, and highlight some of the issues that I think are relevant as we talk about the transition pathway we see as we see as being laid out for the Alberta Industrial Heartland. So I want to start by talking about the environmental implications and market potential for Alberta hydrogen. So we actually have a pretty vibrant hydrogen economy in Canada today. We take fossil fuels, we make hydrogen. It does release, for the most part, CO2 to the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas. And that hydrogen is used as an industrial feedstock. It's used to make fertilizer for agriculture. It's used to crack bitumen into synthetic crude oil. It's used to convert crude oils of various sorts into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel. It's used to make plastics and other chemicals and materials. What we envisage for the future is still producing the same kind of industrial feedstock products like fertilizers, etc. But instead of releasing, when you make hydrogen from fossil fuels or even from biomass, instead of releasing that carbon to the atmosphere, we're looking at capturing that carbon and sequestering it deep into the earth, down deeper than a kilometer below the Earth's surface. There's also other places that we can get hydrogen. There are some chemical plants across Canada. They're called chloralkali plants. They make things like sodium hydroxide, and they actually produce hydrogen as a byproduct. And many of these plants actually don't know what to do with the hydrogen and release it to the atmosphere. So there's a possibility of capturing that hydrogen and making it into a fuel. Obviously, that's a low-cost fuel with some benefits. There's also, as Dan talked about, a possibility to make hydrogen, from renewables or nuclear energy, splitting water to oxygen and hydrogen. What we are envisaging is a significant increase in the amount of hydrogen we produce. So we're not only providing an industrial feedstock, but we're actually providing a hydrogen as a fuel, and also hydrogen for export to other economies. We see hydrogen being possible to use for transportation fuels, as Dan's talked about, for buildings, for heating buildings, for industry, and as well as it could also be used for power generation. So if you can use electricity to make hydrogen, hydrogen can actually sometimes, and there's some really interesting studies recently suggesting if you want to do long-term storage of electricity, hydrogen is actually very effective. You're talking about storing electricity for months at a time or for weeks to months. Hydrogen is a very good way to do it, because then you can bring the electricity back if needed. So Canada has, as Dan mentioned, very low-cost blue and green hydrogen, some of the lowest in the world. But what about the environmental footprint? We've done the life cycle analysis of blue hydrogen production, and it works out with the whole life cycle, getting the emissions associated with extracting, for example, natural gas from the earth, processing that natural gas into pipelines, and converting that natural gas into hydrogen. When you couple the carbon capture and storage, the overall carbon footprint is about 3 kilograms of CO2 for every kilogram of hydrogen. In comparison, the green hydrogen, the life cycle emissions there, looking at the production of say a hydro facility, a large hydro facility, or wind or solar facilities, it's about 0.8 to about 3 kilograms of CO2. So they're in the same range. Often the green hydrogen's a little bit lower than the blue hydrogen. And there's hope that if we actually reduce some of the methane emissions upstream, we can get the blue hydrogen even lower than what it is today. One of the important things here is whether you take blue hydrogen or green hydrogen, when we use it to replace, for example, our existing transportation fuels, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, there's a reduction in life cycle emissions that are estimated to be around 80 to 95%. If we use it to replace natural gas in, say, buildings, industry, or power generation, it's in the 67 to 90%. So this is a very significant. This tells us that we're on the pathway to a net zero world, if obviously by moving towards hydrogen. And obviously we need to get rid of all of the emissions to get truly to net zero, but this will take us a good part of the way, and we can see ways of cleaning up the rest of the emissions as we move into the future. The end-use emissions for greenhouse gas, the end-use greenhouse gas emissions in Alberta are shown here. They're about 204 million tons. This is about 75% of all of the greenhouse gas emissions in Alberta. And a lot of them are associated with making the fuels that Alberta either uses itself or it sells to other provinces into the United States, et cetera. And obviously we're talking about the power generation within the province here, the emissions associated with generating electricity, the emissions associated that are consumed, burned, and combusted in order to support the oil and gas industry. But there's a lot of other emissions from end use of the fuels in the province of Alberta for buildings, other industries like cement industry, et cetera, gasoline, diesel, and other transportation sectors that are in the province. And blue or green hydrogen, we know, can dramatically reduce, as I showed on the previous chart, the emissions from all these sources. And what we've done is in some of the analysis we've done in a report that came out about a month ago, and actually it's in the report that came out yesterday is focused on Alberta, is we tried to identify what share of this market would potential to go to hydrogen. There's also some of it could go to electrification, some of it to biofuels, but an estimate of what share could go to hydrogen is shown here. We could take our existing industrial feedstock production, that's about 5,400 tons a day. Add on to that, what we could use by switching the diesel sector in the province to hydrogen, significant proportion of that, I think we estimated 80%. That's about 3,800 tons of hydrogen a day. About 30% of our gasoline market, it's about 760 tons a day. And the natural gas market, we have very big natural gas demands in the province, another 21,000, for a total of 31,000 tons of hydrogen a day. So at $1.50 a kilogram, that's a $17 billion market. And the export market for the province, we estimate to be probably 2 to 3 times larger than what would be domestically consumed within the province. So what we'd like to do is, obviously there's a big opportunity here. We know that from the data that Dan has shown you already that we can make blue hydrogen at a lower cost than even diesel fuel, the wholesale cost of diesel. So how do we actually start to make this, this new energy system work and put it together in a way, as the mayor just mentioned, is to ensure that we have economic viability without ongoing continuing public investment. So one of the big things to really understand about building a new hydrogen energy system is that even though we can make it easily, there are some significant challenges with hydrogen. It is a gas, so it's much more difficult to pick up and move around and to store than liquids are, especially if you start trying to think about moving the gas in small quantities. So what we need to do is to build a new energy system through hydrogen nodes where we have all of there's an alignment of what is needed. First of all, an ability to make low cost waste blue or green hydrogen, and to make significant amounts of reliable production of low cost hydrogen from these sources that is going to obviously be low carbon as well. A substantial nearby markets for the hydrogen, and especially in the transportation and heating fuel markets, we see those as the ones that have the greatest opportunity, but there are other potential markets as well, some of the heavy industry markets. An ability to connect the two, and ideally connect them with pipelines. And this is because, as you'll see, is that the pipelines are as long as you're doing it at a sufficient scale, the pipelines are the lowest cost way of connecting supply to demand. It's how we move another gas today called natural gas around. It's moved in pipelines typically to provide it from where it's produced to where it's consumed within the country. And we need a scale of supply and demand where the economics works without the sustained public investment that the mayor had talked about. And clearly, in order to do this, we need to have an engaged industry, government, and academics. In effect, we've had a problem. There's been a talk about a hydrogen economy for the last, 20, even 40 years, since the first concept of a hydrogen economy started about 40 years ago. And we've been stuck within a very vicious cycle. We don't have any vehicles to use the hydrogen because we don't have the infrastructure, and we don't have the infrastructure because we don't have the vehicles using the hydrogen. So somehow we need to convert this vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle. We need to break this vicious cycle, and we have an opportunity to do it in certain parts of Canada where we can actually have low-cost waste blue or green hydrogen, and so we can start to provide that and find a way of breaking this vicious cycle and making it into a virtuous cycle. The strategy that we're proposing here, and specifically focused on in the Alberta Industrial Heartland, gives us an opportunity to do this, is to piggyback essentially on the low-cost industrial blue hydrogen production. So here's industrial scale blue hydrogen production. It's typically made in large reformers or large factories that convert literally hundreds of tons of hydrogen per day. Typical facilities, somewhere between 200 to 500 tons of hydrogen per day. And it can be produced by capturing the carbon and sequestering it. The cost of that, including the carbon capture and storage, is about $1.50 a kilogram of hydrogen. And this is already being done within the Edmonton Industrial Heartland region. We want to take a pipeline from that and take it out to possible markets for fueling trains, for fueling buses and municipal bus fleets or trucks, for supplying residential or commercial buildings. It could even be used in supporting power generation. And we could even take renewable power, convert it into hydrogen and add it into the same pipeline, because essentially hydrogen is hydrogen. It doesn't matter to any of the end uses whether it's quote blue or green, because it's actually the same molecule. So we want to create substantial nearby markets for the hydrogen pipeline that connect the supply and demand. And the idea here is attract hydrogen using industries and original equipment manufacturers. I think it's worth noting that there's also a potential if you don't have a pipeline connection, we can convert the hydrogen at the industrial scale site into liquid form, into a liquid form. It's a 253 degrees Celsius below zero, so you have to chill it down, extremely low temperature, and it can be and put onto a truck and then trucked to a new location. And this is a relatively efficient way of moving it by truck. The problem it does is the liquefaction process adds around $3 per kilogram. So it really takes the price up very high. And it's difficult with this process to actually meet the target prices we see within Alberta in order to be able to really create a strong demand for this hydrogen especially within fueling stations for, say, trains, trucks, or buses. And what we envisage here is in our calculations and models have suggested that in order to make this supply chain economically viable, we need to be getting the fueling stations up to about 2 to 10 tons of hydrogen delivery per day of fuel cell grade, highly compressed hydrogen ready to go into a vehicle. And we're looking at a price of that of about $3.50 per kilogram of hydrogen. At that price, we should be able to come in below the price of diesel fuel for a similar kilometers driven. In feeding into space heating, we're looking for a lower price. It doesn't have to be as pure, and it doesn't also have to be as compressed as high, and there's other benefits of putting it into space heating. And the real opportunity here is to address the clean fuel standards that's coming out. And this is probably one of the lowest cost ways of doing it, even though this hydrogen is going to be more expensive than natural gas is today. So what I'd like to do now is to talk about the case study where we think we can do what we've just talked about, how we can build a hydrogen node in the Alberta Industrial Heartland. And we've picked the Alberta Industrial Heartland because it's a very special part of Canada and unique part of Canada. In Alberta itself produces a lot of hydrogen, some of it produced in Fort McMurray and the Fort McKay. There's other regions, for example, Medicine Hat produces quite a lot of hydrogen. And the Alberta Industrial Heartland near Edmonton produces about 2,250 tons of hydrogen per day. And it's used for fertilizers, for upgrading, refining, and for merchant hydrogen. It sells into refineries, etc. This region is just northeast of Edmonton. It already has a hydrogen pipeline that it belongs to Air Products. It has a CO2 pipeline, the Quest CO2 pipeline, that is already being used to create some blue hydrogen. And it has another black one pipeline here. It's called the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line that allows carbon to go down to be used for enhanced oil recovery. And we already are producing, in our estimates, is about 937 tons of hydrogen a day are produced by these three companies here. And so they're producing the hydrogen from natural gas or from heavy oil in the case of Northwest Redwater, and putting it into these pipelines for sequestration. So they already have the capability, they're already producing it at a cost competitive price. So the issue that we started looking at is, well, where could we use this hydrogen? Where are the potential markets and how can we connect the two? So what we've plotted out here is a map of where all of the freight carriers are within the Edmonton region. This is the hydrogen pipeline that already exists. So we're zoomed in on the city of Edmonton here. And what you see in all the red dots are the major trucking companies that have literally thousands of trucks, heavy trucks. And the truck fueling stations are also in here. And you notice that both of these exist on two corridors. They're both anchored in the region where we actually produce hydrogen in the region around the hydrogen pipeline and further north and east of here, there's lots of hydrogen production. But they come in one corridor is across Highway 16 and the other corridor down on a diagonal cutting through to Highway 2 and then down towards the airport where you have a number of other trucking companies and lots and sort of warehouses, et cetera, that could use hydrogen. Our estimate is that if we look at existing uses of diesel and gasoline, there's a market in Edmonton alone. The market for hydrogen here is about 672 tons of hydrogen per day. So it's a very substantive market. Remember that we talked about needing fueling stations with about 2 to 10 tons a day. There's a lot of hydrogen here. There's a lot of hydrogen here that could be used to support literally dozens of fueling stations. If we actually go to the municipal fleets, which is a very interesting opportunity because this is another sector that the cities own. And what we've only put here is that the Edmonton municipal fleets, and we see the bus fleets are shown in blue here. The other municipal fleets are shown in orange, and these are the size of the fueling stations and how much fuel they deliver every year for the municipal vehicles. So we see an opportunity. These are only the diesel vehicles. These vehicles in the city of Edmonton use about 32 million liters of diesel per year. To replace that, we would need about 20 tons of hydrogen per day. So enough for 3 or 4 fueling stations could be very effective fueling stations if this market was to convert to hydrogen. We don't envisage all of this market going to hydrogen, but a significant proportion of it potentially. Also interested in where the injection sites are if you wanted to put hydrogen into commercial and residential heating. Fort Saskatchewan ATCO's already got a project to put hydrogen from the pipeline here into an injection port for feeding the town of Fort Saskatchewan with about 5% hydrogen in a trial next year. But there are other gates within the city of Edmonton as shown here. And you notice that they are also on, like the municipal fleets, like the private fleets, like the trucking station, on the same corridors. That one going across Highway 2 here, Highway 16, and one in a diagonal down towards the airport. Finally, I think we want to look at, we've also looked at the potential to repurpose some existing discontinued pipelines that could be repurposed to carry hydrogen. And so we've identified where these pipelines are. There's a discontinued jet fuel pipeline here. There's a bunch of discontinued natural gas pipelines. And there's a possibility of repurposing some of these with taking care of looking at the materials that are used in the pipeline and possibly putting plastic liners down them. to get to a much lower cost way of getting this hydrogen economy off to a start. And you notice that a number of these pipelines, especially down in this diagonal here, follow the same corridors that we are talking about, where the markets would be. And originating here, you can see at the corner the Air Products hydrogen pipeline that already exists. In order to start this off, it was about 2 years ago, we worked with the Alberta Motor Transport Association, and who's leading this project, and brought in with two companies, Trimac and Bison. Ballard is a fuel cell company out of Vancouver. Dana is a electric axle company that makes electric parts for heavy trucks. And Freightliner is, of course, a truck company. Partnered together with Nordressa, with an assembler. HTEC is a fuel cell manufacturer. And with support from Emission Reductions Alberta and Natural Resources Canada, got a project funded to put 2 hydrogen fuel cell heavy duty trucks on the road. These are not normal trucks that you find in hydrogen fuel cell trucks in many of the projects been going around the world. These ones are much larger. They're 63.5 tons gross weight, about 50% larger. They have 2 trailers, very heavy loads. And these are the standard vehicles. Anybody driven Highway 2 between Edmonton and Calgary will know that these are very common trucks to find on the road. These trucks will drive 700 kilometers between refueling. They'll be fueled in Edmonton in the industrial Heartland region, drive to Calgary, drop off a load, pick up another load, bring it back to Edmonton, about a 640 kilometer full distance. And the road trials are going to begin. We've just been COVID delayed. We expect by a year from now, by November 2021, these trucks should be on the road. They're being built now in Montreal, and we're excited. The design is finished. We just have been involved in finishing the design of this, and we're going to see these trucks on the road in a year from now. We're also working with some others. In order to really grow the demand at the fueling station, we also need to be able to look for other ways of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, incorporating hydrogen into our infrastructure, our existing fuel infrastructure. And so we see an exciting opportunity with hydrogen diesel dual fuel vehicles. There's a company in Vancouver called Hydra. There's a group at the University of Alberta that's also working with engine companies to actually modify, and both of these are technologies for putting hydrogen into existing diesel vehicles. You do a modification of the engine and you inject hydrogen in. One can inject in the Hydra up to about 40% hydrogen within the energy provided by diesel. And the work at the University of Alberta, they're trying to get higher because they're working with the actual software of the engine to maximize the engine performance. We see this as an important bridge technology to really rapidly build out fleets of vehicles. And it's valuable in creating fuel demand if you only have a very few number of fueling stations, because if these vehicles run out of hydrogen, it doesn't matter. They just become a diesel engine again. It's more of a problem if these vehicles run out of hydrogen. We're in discussions with the municipalities about a hydrogen fuel cell municipal bus fleet, and with some train companies about putting hydrogen onto trains. One of the things we're interested in particularly is looking at how Edmonton connects with other cities like Calgary here, or Edmonton to Fort McMurray. So what we've done is analyze, well, how many trucks are moving on these trips every day? So we got this information thanks to the Alberta Transport, provide us access to some of their data. And we've estimated based on how much fuel these trucks are using every day. And we're about over 125 or about 150 tons of hydrogen a day on all 3 of these routes, 93 tons a day just on the route between Edmonton and Calgary. And so we see this as a real target market to bring the hydrogen and start providing fueling stations to support heavy freight. Our goal is to create not only a greater Edmonton hydrogen node supported by the industrial heartland, but also nodes in Fort McMurray, where there's a lot of hydrogen production there, nodes in Calgary. Calgary doesn't have hydrogen production nearby, but we might be able to bring it in with pipelines and create demand. And another opportunity, which is I think really important, is the potential for export markets to other places in Canada, the United States, and even overseas. We see this, these are some of the node models we're looking at for Alberta, but we've also got opportunities across Canada with with the opportunities around refineries and other places across Canada, like chlor-alkali plants, places where there's low-cost electricity, to use these hydrogen nodes and develop other nodes opportunities. That's all I have to present. We're excited about, and we really appreciate the support that we've had from the Mayor, Hnatiw, and her colleagues to help us put this project together. We're excited about trying to expand it to other jurisdictions and see if we can actually create corridors of low-cost hydrogen that will really attract the investment, the economic development, the jobs that we're all looking for. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dave. I feel that we blasted through an undergraduate course in about 40 minutes, but that's, I suppose, the way it works. Look, I've been active in the chat here. It's actually really, really interesting. I think there's really constructive dialogue going on there. We do have, half a dozen or more questions here, and maybe I'll just sort of start on a couple. One of the questions was housekeeping. Will the presentation be available after the fact? And the answer is yes. What we'll do is we'll just post it on our website, and just head to our website and you'll be able to download this presentation. And frankly, all of the reports, and including the ones that Dave and his team has produced over the last couple of years. I've got a couple of things here, Dave. Let's see. Here's one. In the life cycle emissions of blue hydrogen, have you included methane emissions that occur with mining and transportation, et cetera?
Yes. Yes. So that's when we've looked at the methane emissions. We've looked at the emissions associated with upgrading the natural gas you pull out of the ground to pipeline quality. And so those are in there in the numbers.
There's one from Robert Trombley that's sort of the same thing. How much is how significant a hurdle is it in our Alberta's methane natural gas leakage problems to gaining environmentalist buy-in on blue hydrogen? And if I sort of scratch into Robert's question there, it's really around carbon intensity, right? And rather than the fact of this green good, blue bad, when you really do the carbon intensity, not all of them, but some ways that you can make blue hydrogen, it actually has less carbon, full life cycle emissions intensity than some greens. So I think the issue really is that it's just not as easy as colors coding good, bad. You've got to quantify it, right? And Dave, one of the things I know that is in the report is actually a recommendation to do that, right? Is that we need to come up with standards of definitions. Do you want to riff on that a bit?
Yes, I think we need definitions and standards, but we also need to keep putting pressure, I would argue, on the companies. And the government has put in quite a lot of incentives now to reduce the methane emissions that are associated with extracting natural gas and oil from the environment, from the subsurface, and I think that will really help to reduce the numbers. We think we can drop from 3 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen down to about 2 or even less, and that should be able to be done at a relatively low cost.
Look, there's another question. I'm actually plagiarizing or lifting it from the chat line as opposed to a pure question, but it was this notion of pipelines, right? And people were asking, how much hydrogen can you put in a pipeline? And there's lots of people that piped in and said, conventional wisdom, about up to 20%. After that, you have to retrofit it. But boy, there's lots of companies, competing in that space for new technologies and how you would retrofit. I mean, but if you riff on that notion of pipelines for a second, I think what's really important from my perspective is there's two games here. One is using hydrogen domestically to decarbonize and to improve air quality and so on. And that's important, and that's a valid goal. But right now, especially Alberta, but much of Canada we are an energy exporter. We're a fossil fuel exporter. And if we are seeing those markets change very dramatically, very quickly before our eyes, so, California has said that quite quickly they will not be selling internal combustion engines in the state of California. The UK and Quebec, the province of Quebec, both came out here within the last few days and said they're not going to be selling internal combustion engines. So for me, it's not just about putting hydrogen to work in Alberta. It's about, can we use our fossil fuels in this country in a way where the energy in those fossil fuels can be completely compatible with a low carbon or net zero emission society, which means an export market, right? And I'll riff on it just a little bit here, which means getting things into pipelines and shipping them, to California. And I know, Dave, you're doing some work on that. or putting hydrogen in pipelines and getting it to the coast. And one of the questions was, boy, we've had such a hard time getting pipelines in place. Why is this different? And so that's the question. So overview.
So I think one thing that's different is if you leak hydrogen, it's not going to, there's no groundwater damage. The hydrogen will go into the atmosphere and diffuse, and it diffuses very quickly. It's a small molecule. So the concern about environmental damage from hydrogen is very low or zero. In fact, actually, hydrogen leaking into soil will actually fertilize the soil. It actually is there's been a lot of work done on that, looking at it actually increases the fertility of the soil. Interestingly, changes the biology of the soil, but it makes it more fertile. It's that sideline. But so my hope is that the environmental groups will see this as really a part of a transition pathway. Eventually, we're going to run out of carbon sequestration space. We're going to potentially start to run out of, in future times, or the price of green hydrogen will come down. And I think we're going to switch over to more and more green hydrogen. What I see is that we have with blue hydrogen a low enough cost that we can actually build out the infrastructure, create the market opportunities, and create the jobs, create the wealth, and help in the transition to a net zero future. And I think that's what we see as being important. It doesn't mean we don't do green hydrogen. If some regions, for example, there are in many places in Quebec and in some parts of Ontario where they have significant amounts of low carbon electricity, but they don't have a demand. Sometimes they produce it in the middle of the night or in certain times of the year when they actually produce a lot more than what they need. We can make hydrogen, or hydrogen can be made from that very cost effectively and feed into transportation, space heating, and other applications.
I'm just going to riff on that a little bit before we get to the question, and that is, you mentioned about one of the main reasons why people don't like pipelines is because of the environmental risk. And certainly, there's not a spill risk like there is in oil, and you talked a little bit about that. To me, another big reason why people don't like pipelines is because the way we use the products that goes through those pipelines today are usually combusted. Carbon dioxide goes into the atmosphere, and we have
a greenhouse gas
warmings. But if you're transporting hydrogen in a pipeline where there's literally a feeding frenzy in the world right now among countries that want to get to net zero. It's a bit of a different equation by saying not liking pipelines when the stuff that would be in the pipelines, hydrogen, is absolutely critical to decrease emissions. That seems like a fundamentally different equation, value proposition, and potentially a space for coalition building and dialogue and understanding about why pipelines in this case would absolutely be critical in order to get to net zero. And just one last comment, when I think of these concept of pipelines and export, I always ground back into, we're seeing a global economy emerge before our eyes for hydrogen. So since Mayor Hnatiw and her colleagues and so on leaned into this and became leaders of the task force, Germany, Japan, South Korea, and even California have said they will, or they'd be very interested in importing hydrogen because other parts of the world can make it cheaper. And two countries have put the first international shipments of hydrogen into the international market, and that's Saudi Arabia and Australia. So this is not academic. This is not a modeling exercise to say there will be maybe under some conditions a hydrogen market for export. It's there, and other countries are filling it. The question is, are we going to? So
I think that's important. And one, I could offer a number. South Korea, for example, has said they want to basically import from other places something like 14,000 tons of hydrogen a day by 2040. And that's the kind of scale that they're talking about, and they're out marketing. And then Japan also has some big numbers. Germany has large numbers, China. And so I think that there's growing market potential. And the question is, we can bring, we've done some modeling analysis to say, well, what would the cost of providing that hydrogen for export? We need to do some more work on this to figure out how best to do it. But the economics look very promising for the province. And indeed, we've had companies from South Korea come to talk to us about the possibility of selling hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, et cetera, within Alberta, and then in as a sort of a benefit of that, buying the hydrogen, the blue hydrogen from Alberta. So as a part of the of an international exchange, investing in exporting hydrogen to South Korea, because they want to also have access to our markets. And I think that we've got some exciting opportunities that the Canadian government, the Alberta government, and other provinces should need to be thinking about.
Dave, I'm going to combine two questions in the chat. One from Pierre-Olivier Pinault, happens to be a Transition Accelerator fellow working on a different file that the accelerator has, which is great integration. And one from Colton Borley, and it's all around CCUS. And basically, combining the questions, they're saying, look, blue hydrogen requires CCUS. Is there any risks associated with that? What's the state of the technology? And how much pore space is there? So we haven't talked much about CCUS and that it's so important to the blue. Would it be a rate limiting step in terms of pore space and infrastructure?
No, I think that's a really good question. About 12 or 13 years ago, there was a major investments by the federal government and the Alberta government in trying to quantify the potential for carbon capture and storage in Alberta. And it was really at that time thought that we'd be putting carbon capture and storage on coal-fired power plants. The estimate there was certainly many hundreds of tons of CO2 could be sequestered in the subsurface of Alberta per year and for many decades. There's in 2015, a report came out from the United States that has done an atlas of carbon capture and storage. If people want to Google this, type in CCS Atlas, and you'll see that. And it has actually, it's American study, but it actually does Alberta as well in Western Canada. And the numbers are very large. We obviously, we've done it already. We're putting in the Alberta Industrial Heartland is putting over 2.6 million tons of CO2 in the subsurface now with, and it's, there's not been leakage problems, et cetera. But obviously we need to develop and implement standards. We already have a lot of the standards developed, and really, clearly successful carbon capture and storage is going to be essential in order to make this whole area work, and we need to invest more. I will say that Alberta has holy rocks. We got a lot of holes in our rocks. It's where our oil fossil fuels came from, and we're basically putting them back into the holes that exist under our feet. So, and it's deep down. It's where the CO2 becomes a liquid and actually gets heavier than the water around it. So it's all the geoscientists that we've talked to says it's very secure. We have to demonstrate it and prove it.
But I think it's fair to say that, this is no longer really an emerging technology. This has been operated successfully for years at many places in many countries around the world.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm going to combine two other questions here. One, Ryan Besser, and another one from Benjamin Israel, and they're both sort of around, okay, where to from here? And Benjamin is mostly, and there's another one, and lots of chatter in the chat around, is this just a policy play? Is the solution just coming out with a big clean fuel standard or something? And Dave, what I did is I put into the chat this notion of what the node model is and why we think that's a key part. And if you sort of take a crack at that, then I can update people on the status of the node.
Yes, so certainly the node model is really around identifying the 5 things that I talked about. Where do you find low carbon hydrogen, and then find demand nearby, connect them, build the demand to a scale which is economically viable, which really in the transportation sector, it's really talking about putting a fueling station in where we can get at least to 2 tons of hydrogen a day, which means really when you think about that, a typical, say a heavy truck might use say 50 or 60 or 70 kilograms a day. So say it uses 50 kilograms a day. We're going to need 40 big trucks to support a fueling station. So we're not talking about doing 1, 2, or 3 trucks here. We're talking about major investments. And we've been looking at the cost of those investments and the amount of CO2 reduction. And in many of them, we can get down under $100 a ton of CO2 when you look at the investments, the incremental investments on the vehicles. And there's payback to the companies that are doing it because they're going to get a fuel that is lower cost than diesel fuel they're using today. So my sense is that we need to, this is an environmental project, but it's also an economic development project. In some way, it's almost more of an economic development project, but and it has the environmental benefits, because I think it's a way of creating the jobs and creating a fuel, a more valuable fuel, and upgrading the gas that the resources that we have in the province. So I see it as the node is really about bringing all the parts of the value chain together.
Yeah, and I'll even take a crack at that right now. Like from my perspective, there's this great frenzy around hydrogen. People understand it has this great decarbonizing potential, lots of other attributes. And individual companies and individual sectors are trying to sort out how they could use hydrogen in their business. And they're having sort of a tough time because none of these companies or even sectors have a role to play, and they can't fulfill all the functions you need in a full hydrogen value chain: production, distribution, and use. And frankly, none of them can use enough hydrogen to get to the volumes that you need to make it economical. I mean, the cost of hydrogen plummets with scale. That's sort of the issue. So this node model is really a series of strategic dialogues among new markets, new potential demand centers, municipal transport, private transport, heat and power, where companies and sectors can understand how much hydrogen could they use at just different times in the future, under what scenarios. And if you add all those up, all of a sudden you've got a regional scale of use that could very well get to a critical scale of demand that does make it economic. So another way I think that we think about it is, instead of innovating on technology, which we have spent untold fortunes on over the decades, this is really about commercial deployment innovation, or it's around business model innovation or market innovation. It feels different, but we think that we've got the technologies, all the technologies that we need somewhere in the world have been commercially de-risked. What people haven't done is brought them together inside of an economy to make it work instead of one spatial area, right? And I mean, this is not easy. There's not going to be thousands of jobs next Thursday for the mayor to announce, but we do think, over the medium and long term, there will be tens of thousands of jobs associated with this new economy. Question is whether they're going to be here or not. So, all right, that was a bit of a soapbox. Let's see. We've got 3 more minutes. Here's another question from someone called Anonymous Attendee, which is quite a remarkable name for a parent to give someone. But it says, Mr. or Mrs. Miss Attendee says, wondering your thoughts on the other regions with node potential across Canada. Dave?
Yes. Actually, it's really, we're looking at nodes. Well, there's an obvious node in Prince George in because there's a chlor-alkali plant there that produces a lot of hydrogen, that residue, and there's some initiatives starting already there that we've been watching and would like to support and help. There's node potential down in Vancouver around other plants. There's lots of any place that has low-cost green hydrogen. Manitoba, for example. Manitoba has not only a chlor-alkali plant, but low-cost electricity that could be used to make hydrogen. Around the Bruce Nuclear Power Station down in the companies there are very interested. Refineries in Sarnia, there's a carbon sequestration potential in North Shore of Lake Erie. That there could also be an opportunity for a blue hydrogen node there, but also green hydrogen coming from the nuclear facilities. Quebec has got a lot of potential. We were involved a bit in working with the group doing the hydrogen strategy for the Maritimes. They pay a lot for their natural gas, so the shock of paying a little more for hydrogen is it makes it almost more economic in the Maritimes. But the opportunity there is probably wind power. Large wind resources within the Maritimes, and the ability to make hydrogen directly from wind farms, both onshore and offshore. So I think there's pockets across Canada. And I think the more you get out the concept of nodes, and if we put the right sort of policy structures in place, I think we would find that new low carbon hydrogen sources would come to out of the woodwork, and opportunities for using it.
Great, thanks, Dave. I've got some people on text inquiring about my
your bruises.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to show up in the shadows. As it turns out, there was not enough skiing to go backcountry skiing on the weekend, and my face and a rock tried to occupy the same space at the same time, and I lost that battle. Having said that, thanks, folks, for your interest. Mayor Hnatiw, any closing remarks from you?
Great conversation and great questions. And just to build off a little bit about, what David was talking about, whether it's across Alberta or across Canada, that's what I love about hydrogen. Depending on your geology and on your most low cost feedstock, whether it's wind, waves, natural gas, this is like the perfect Canadian story because it's got enough to be, a common thread, but enough diversity that everyone can find their way. Proton's doing great work with in situ. I mean, there's just, we're not saying we have all the answers. We're just saying we've got enough information now to get busy and the rest will come in. And that's why it has to be a really open source collaborative effort where we're all focused on the same solution. And that is us being responsible stewards of our environment and our economy. It's not an either or, it's both. So thank you for that.
Very cogent, practical advice as always from the mayor to end up with. Dave, thanks very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
We had about 200 people here at the height of the call. So thanks everyone for participating. You can go to our website and download the full suite of reports, including the one that we released yesterday. Please follow us at Transition Accelerator at either LinkedIn or Twitter. We'd very much like to hear from you about what you liked about this presentation and what you didn't. We're considering doing more of them. So all constructive feedback welcome. Thanks very much. Let's keep in touch. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor.